On the broadcast tonight, thousands converge on small-town Louisiana over a case that has hit a national nerve. At the White House, the target of the president's anger today and what he wasn't talking about. In our health series tonight, fertility after 40. Who knew there were dinosaurs in the state of South Dakota? Plus, we'll show you the new $5 bill. NBC Nightly News is straight ahead.
From NBC News World Headquarters in New York, this is NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams.
Good evening. Even though a lot of Americans still don't know the story of what happened in the small town of Jena, Louisiana, tonight thousands of Americans have converged on that town. They've gathered in the name of race and civil rights and justice, rallied in part over the internet. It's a march reminiscent of another era in this country. We have two reports on this significant gathering in the South tonight, beginning with NBC's Martin Savage. He's at the scene of the march. Martin, good evening.
Good evening, Brian. Well, the demonstrations for the most part have come to an end tonight. There have been no problems, and there's also no official head count. But it's safe to say there were a lot of people here. And just about everybody who was here felt they were part of something much bigger than the problems of a small town. Even before the sun came up, the buses rolled in. When the highways into town became clogged, people walked by the thousands.
Justice! Where do we want it? Now!
And stood in front of the courthouse demanding justice.
Free! Knock it down!
The journey to Jena began 13 months ago when white students at the local high school hung nooses from a shade tree after an African-American student asked to sit beneath it. Over the next few months, there were verbal and finally physical confrontations. In the end, 6 black students were charged with crimes, initially including attempted murder. But no whites, not even those who admitted hanging the nooses. 17-year-old Michael Bell was the first to go to trial and found guilty. Last week, his conviction was overturned, but the high school football star remains in jail. Today, the Reverend Al Sharpton stood before the crowd with Bell's parents at his side.
We sit and stand in a city that says it's a prank to hang a hangman's noose, but that it is attempted murder to have a fight.
Those listening came from as far away as San Jose, Atlanta, and Detroit. Many, like this busload from Durham, North Carolina, traveled all night.
Something needs to be done about it, and so I feel like I want to do my part.
I think that this Jena 6 movement is going to be the beginning of something bigger, you know, and I just want to be a part of it.
The protesters marched through this predominantly white town whose schools and businesses were closed after the mayor declared a state of emergency. Jena resident Michelle Nail watched the protesters pass, calling the case overblown.
I put it in the attorney's hands in the justice system because we're living in the 21st century. They're not going to let people get railroaded.
But marching in the street, protesters saw it differently.
It's injustice, coming for justice.
She, like many here today, said they didn't come to Jena because they wanted to. They came because they had to. This afternoon, an appeals court ordered that a bond hearing has to be held for Michael Bell within the next 72 hours. Meanwhile, the question on the minds of many tonight, what happens here tomorrow after the crowds are gone? Protest organizers say they'll be watching, and if need be, they'll be back. Brian?
Martin, thank you. Martin Savage starting us off in Jena, Louisiana tonight. There have been many racially tinged cases in this country over the years, so why has this one prompted all these people, thousands of them, as we said, to make their way to what is, after all, a 6-stoplight town in the middle of Louisiana? We get more from there tonight from NBC's Mike Taibbi.
In the crowds that descended on Jena, it wasn't just the elderly who were thinking of those half-century-old images, the faded film sequences of equality denied, segregation stubbornly defended.
What do we want? Justice! What do we want? Now!
For the old and young here, the current-day reality that white students hung nooses on a tree, igniting racial tensions that led only to the arrests of black students, was irresistibly powerful.
Say it loud! I'm black and I'm proud!
Nooses hanging from the tree.
Terrorism.
Bringing all kind of memories back to mind.
And while many who live here say Jena has been unfairly maligned,
our town has been transformed into this racist monster That is not true.
In dozens of American cities, thousands who couldn't get to Jena but who believe racism is still an intrusive reality took part in so-called Jena 6 rallies because they believe, as does Leon White of Orlando, who did take the long bus ride, that unequal justice is not confined to Jena.
See what happened. I got a 14-year-old son. We've been through the same similar situation in Florida.
Some historians are already looking at Jena as a kind of laboratory of how the country's racial divide has persisted and what it would take for it to finally be bridged.
There's no question that there's been tremendous progress, but there's a lot of work to be done.
And Southern chroniclers like Howell Raines are not surprised by the protests in Jena.
This crystallized a feeling in the minority community, and I think it also touched a deep-running sense of anxiety in the entire country.
73-year-old Ashton Ramsey of New Orleans marched in Jena for the same reasons he'd marched in protests nearly 50 years ago, when it was risky to do so.
You face threat of losing your job, plus you face being beat up.
But now, parents with children come to the spot where the tree with the nooses used to be, an indelible image
no justice, no peace,
to last for the next generation. Mike Taibbi, NBC News, Jena, Louisiana.